Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast with Benjamin Lee. We're here to talk about tips and strategies to have an I Can Do mindset. Life is what you put into it. Get the most you can. Here's your host, Benjamin Lee.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of I Can Do. I am Benjamin Lee. Thank you so much for being here. We have another fantastic guest with us today from Toronto. I'd like to introduce you to Andy Semotiuk. I'm so thankful that Andy is here, and we have a lot to talk about. Let me give you a few details about who Andy is, and I'm sure he'll want to chime in on this as well. During Andy's career, Andy has published 5 books that are available on Amazon. We're going to talk about a book that's very near and dear to his heart. Andy has been a Forbes contributor for over 10 years and has over 1 million readers that have read his articles on immigration. In addition, Andy is a U.S. and Canadian lawyer practicing law at Pace Law Firm in Toronto. He previously lived and practiced law in Los Angeles for 10 years and in New York for 5 years. Andy is also a former UN correspondent who worked in New York and wrote articles on immigration and human rights for Southern News Services of Canada and other media outlets elsewhere. And he is a senior advisor to the Center for Eastern European Democracy. Andy, that has been a very fantastic and interesting life and career. I look forward to learning more. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here with you, and I know we're going to have a good time talking about our lives and possibly a little bit about my books.
Yes.
Even a little about the background.
Yeah. So we have a couple of things that have already connected us just before we started or before I hit the record button. We know that family is near and dear to both of us. Let's talk a little bit about family, and let's talk a little bit about this book that you're really passionate about.
Right. Okay. So the book is called Solomea. There it is there, if you can see it. It's Solomea, Star of Opera's Golden Age. And I think the best way to talk about the book is to tell you a little story about Solomia and how I learned about her and so on. Please. I was going to correct what you said. She's actually my great aunt. She's my grandmother's sister.
Gotcha. I apologize.
And here's how the story started. I was a small kid. I was growing up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And at the age of about, I'm going to say about 7 or 8 years old, I came home one day from school for lunch. And I'm sitting in the kitchen at the table eating my lunch, and my mother comes in. And she opens a letter, and she reads it, and she says, "Oh, Teta Solomea Pomerla." That was Ukrainian, and we're Ukrainian in background. I was born in Canada, but my mother and my forefathers came from Ukraine to Canada and to the United States. And I'll tell you more about that in a while. But what she said was, Aunt Solomea has passed away. Mm-hmm. That was the first time I ever heard of Aunt Solomea, the character in this book. And what struck me was, who is she? And she said, oh, she was a great opera star. And that was about it. That's all I learned about her. And I went on with my life, and it didn't mean much to me, other than it seemed kind of strange to me about how this news came to us. And as I learned later on, Aunt Solomea, the opera star, had passed on in 1952. And the event I'm talking about happened in about 1957. Meaning 5 years later. And the reason for the delay in our learning about her death was she died behind the Iron Curtain in the former Soviet Union.
Wow.
Now, that's not where she lived most of her life, but that's where her life ended. And I'll come back to that later in our interview about her life towards the end.
Yeah.
But as far as the book is concerned, over the years, I learned a little more. For example, I went to an opera called Madame Butterfly, which is quite a popular opera. Now, for the listeners, look, I'm not a big opera guy. I don't go to operas every weekend.
Yeah.
I'm not a big opera guy.
Yeah.
But I did, as a kid in high school, go to an opera called Madame Butterfly. And it was only later that I learned, when I was writing this book, that she saved that opera from extinction because the composer, a guy named Puccini, Giacomo Puccini, staged that opera without her at La Scala in Italy in 1904 to a disaster when it was first premiered. It was howled down, shouted down, people whistled it down to the point where the composer, this guy Puccini, who was a world-class composer, had to shut down the run and eventually went to a colleague of his for advice, a guy named Toscanini, who was one of the great conductors in the world. All this was happening in Milan, in Italy, saying to him, hey, listen, I love this opera. I need to stage it. But it was shut down. What do I do? And Toscanini steered Puccini, the composer, to Solomia's doorstep, saying, if you want to rescue that opera, you need Solomia to help you with it. And that's how Solomia, my great aunt, became part of that opera.
Wow.
And later, it was staged in 1904 to great success. And from that day to this day, it is one of the great operas of the world, one of the most popular operas of the world. That's a little story about the opera, and I might tell you a little bit more about the opera later in our interview. But that's sort of how I got into it, writing this, this book, and to the point where I decided, I need to tell the world about it. If I don't know about it, how's the world supposed to know about it?
Yeah. And let me ask, how old was Solomia when she, was presented with this opportunity? And how did she...
I'll tell you a little more about it.
Okay.
In fact, it's an interesting story, that opera itself. It might be the key story that we might relate today in this interview. She was in her early 30s at that time.
Okay.
But she had already reached international fame. She was a singer who knew the words and the music to 60 operas by heart. Wow. She could sing any aria, from any opera, anything by heart, right off the spot. And she did when she taught opera to students.
How was she able to do that?
She knew 8 languages.
Wow.
She was really a star, as a person, extraordinary person, in the sense that discipline, hard work, talent, athletic ability, the capacity to perform every night a different opera, night after night, without fizzling out. All these characteristics, drama. She was a great actress. She had a beautiful, clear voice. If anybody's interested, you can possibly, if you go online, you can hear, although it's scratchy because it was recorded back in the early 1900s, but you can hear her singing. Solomia Krushelnitska was her name. Krushelnitska, a tough name. Not many will remember without concentrating, but nonetheless, Solomia Krushelnitska. At that time, in the 1900s, the world's leading soprano. And for those who are in opera today, they will know the name Maria Callas, who was not long ago, the greatest soprano in the world. So Solomia Krushelnitska was the greatest soprano before Maria Callas.
Awesome.
But here's the story behind Madame Butterfly.
Okay.
Solomia was at the top of her fame. I can't go into how she got up there. I can later, but she was at the top of her fame. All very well known, world over, meaning she had performed in all of Europe, North Africa, Tsarist Russia, South America, she eventually even performed in like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Montreal, Winnipeg, all that. That's later. But anyway, at the time, she's a star. And Puccini puts on this play. Now, why did he put on the play? He was looking for a new opera, and he didn't have anything. And he went to London one day. This is in the early 1900s. And he saw a play. It was about Madame Butterfly. And he loved it. The play was great. And he decided right on the spot, I have to have this play. I'm going to make an opera about this play. And he went to the playwright. He said, the playwright wrote, if you got an emotional Italian choking you by the throat because he wants the right to, use your play for an opera, you have to admit, yes, okay, it's okay. So he got it. He went back to Milan, which is where he was, in Italy. That's where all the opera was there. And he started. He loved it because it was a story about an American naval officer who came to Japan at the opening of Japan in the 1800s, when the American Navy came in and opened up Japan, because prior to that time it was a closed society, closed to the world. So he came in, and he met a young girl. There was a geisha girl named Chiyo-Chiyo-san, which is Japanese for butterfly, Chiyo-Chiyo-san. And they had a romantic relationship. And following the romantic relationship, as it was continuing, he declared to her, "Look, this is great, but I'm being called back to the United States, so I'm going to have to go to the United States." And he said, "Well," she said, "Well, what? But I'll come back." He said, "I'll come back." And she said, "Okay, I'll wait for you." And she waited, not knowing, not knowing that she was pregnant with his son.
Mm.
She gave birth to the son, and year after year passed on, waiting for him to come back, until the son's about 5 years old. And sure enough, he comes back, and she sees his boat, the ship coming in. And she waited it out. But when he arrived, there was one problem. He came with an American wife in tow. So the parents were stuck with the problem.
Yeah.
What's going to happen with the son? Is he going to stay with Chiyo-Chiyo's son and live a life with a geisha mother? Or is he going to travel to America and go back with his father?
Yeah.
And they decide they're going to send him back to America with the father.
Yeah.
And in the final scene of the opera, Chiyo-Chiyo-san says to her young boy, she takes him off to the side and she says, "Look at this face. It is the face of your mother. Remember it. You will never see it again."
Wow.
And then sends him off with the father to take him back to America. And thereafter she commits suicide and dies. That's how the opera ends. It's a very tragic ending.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned earlier, Puccini staged it in Milan at the La Scala, which was the greatest opera theater in the world at that time. But it was a catastrophe. It fell flat. And I told you that he went to Toscanini, who told her, "Okay, get Solomia on this thing." And he did. And they worked together for several months. And he proposed the lead role to her. Now, she was in her 30s, and she had to play a teenager. Chiyo-Chiyo-san as a teenager. So it's quite a challenge. And the earlier singer, a lady named Storchio, after bombing in the original performance, said, "No, I'm leaving. I'm going to New York. Goodbye." So, Puccini was out on a limb, and luckily Solomia came in. But for Solomia, this would be like asking, say, you're in a movie with Sandra Bullock that bombs, And now you go to, another star, Julia, I don't know, so one of the great stars in Hollywood, and you say, Julia Roberts, would you play in this? We're going to restage this movie that just bombed, but you're going to, would you take it on? You're a great star. Well, no, but she knew them. She was friends. And she said, I'll take a risk. I'll do it.
Yeah.
To prepare for that opera, she wore a Japanese outfit for 2 months to put her into the role of Chiyo-san.
Almost like method acting. Just fully embracing the role.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they staged it at a Teatro Grande, which was 60 miles from La Scala in a neighboring city, Brescia. And from the opening scenes, Solomea charmed the audience. Her voice, her crystal clear voice, and her capacity to enter into the role and be the person that she's performing, won the audience over to the point where they were, cheering and asking them to re-perform. It was sort of like instant replay, but opera style back then. Re-sing that aria for us. So they'd have to re-sing the aria a couple of times.
Yeah.
And it ended with 7 standing ovations, which was extraordinary for anyone.
Yeah.
And it went on to world fame, which is to this day. And I mentioned in high school, I went to see that opera, but I did not know at that time that my great aunt had rescued the opera.
Wow.
So why didn't I know? Why? And the answer is because her life, this is part of the back half of the story.
Yeah, please.
Took her to Eastern Europe, to Ukraine, Western Ukraine at the time, at the outset of World War II, when World War II broke out in September 1939. And once she entered what became the Soviet Union, because the Soviets invaded, Poland was divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And that territory where she was, a city called Lviv, which is fairly well known these days because a lot of reporters report from Lviv about the Ukrainian war, with the Russian invasion right now. So she went there, and she never left the Iron Curtain, behind that Iron Curtain, until she died in 1952.
So how old was she when she passed?
She was in her 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you said at the beginning, it was 5 years after her death that you actually learned, or your family learned about her death.
Right.
Yeah. Who had the biggest impact then with helping you learn more about her in preparation for the book?
Thanks for that wonderful question. And I really appreciate the opportunity of sharing these stories with you. Perhaps the biggest impact was my grandmother, because I lived with my grandmother in Los Angeles, actually, when I was in high school. And she was her sister. So she told me all about her life, growing up.
Yeah.
And but also my mother and her sister, my aunt, Helen, who lived in Los Angeles. And they lived with the star in the building during the war, during World War II, in Lviv, when the darkest days of World War II were taking place. The Holocaust was taking place on the streets. Now, we're not Jewish in background, but the Holocaust was taking place in front of us, and life for anybody during that time was terrible.
Yeah.
And there were great risks for anybody, especially for Jewish people, but others as well.
Yeah.
And my folks lived with her in her building, Krushenitska, Solomea's building, in Lviv, under in World War II conditions. So they knew her life very well. So my mother, my aunt Helen, not Solomia, but my aunt Helen, and my grandmother, who was her sister, Solomia's sister, shared, vignettes here and there. But it was not like everyday discussion. And the reason was because they didn't want to talk about World War II and events back then. They were so traumatic.
Yeah.
We lost. I lost an uncle at that time in the war. I wasn't alive, but my uncle.
Right.
He was killed by the NKVD secret police, Soviet secret police back then.
Yeah. Did Solomia have any? Did she write any journals or leave any documentation or anything like that behind of some of her experiences, or how some of that may have impacted her with opera and bringing out those emotions and feelings as she
That's
performed?
another great question. She didn't keep a diary or anything like that, but what she did do is wherever she traveled in the world, and I mentioned she traveled all over Europe, North Africa, Southern America, Northern America. She had someone traveling with her, usually a sister.
Mm-hmm.
So those sisters wrote memoirs. And there's a whole museum in Lviv that in the building that she used to own that has all kinds of archives about her life that they opened up for me to use anything I wanted there. So I have pictures in the book and, all kinds of materials and quotes from people who wrote about her, telling her life story.
Awesome. So take us to the moment then, Andy, where the decision was made in your mind, I have to write this book. Was it over a span of a number of years? Was it instantaneously when you heard about her or her death? What was that final decision? It sounds like you had already written some other successful books prior to this one. Yes. So take us back to that moment.
Well, it was this, I think the moment was when we were visiting in the former Soviet Union in the 1980s. My mother and my mother said, listen, I just finished my legal studies. I became a lawyer, and my mother said, hey, come with me. I want to trace my path coming to North America backwards to Ukraine. I want to go visit Ukraine. So in 1945, she left just at the end of the war, escaping from in front of the Red Army that was invading Ukraine and going towards Germany. She left Ukraine to go westward, and she immigrated to Canada, and my aunt immigrated to Los Angeles. And she had not been back for 40 years. So it was like from 45 to 85 would be 40. It was almost 45 years. And she wanted to go back, and I went with her. And when we went back, we were in Lviv, and we were reading a newspaper. And the newspaper said that there's a new museum opening at the building where they used to live to honor Solomia Krushelnitska.
Wow. That's amazing.
And, it just happened that we read it. And I said, well, let's go see it. But it was still under, communist rule, Gorbachev at that time. So it was dangerous to go visit people. You're not supposed to in the former Soviet Union. It was like a police state. Mm-hmm. But we went under the premise that back then he had declared what they called perestroika and glasnost, meaning openness and re-engineering the economy. So our approach was, if they say something about us showing up, oh, well, it's glasnost, it's open. So we came. We heard it was glasnost, and we came. So we showed up, knocked on the door, and it was a room full of, dignitaries, and we entered. And it was a big surprise for them and for us. We were surprised because they had all these big names up there. And they were surprised because they heard, there's a family member of Solomia who's come like a niece from Canada. Oh, my God. We had a lineup of people wanting to interview my mother, who was then in her, I guess, 70s or 80s, maybe.
Yeah.
And my mother was not, like someone who would talk freely with the press. She'd never talked to the press before in her life.
Yeah.
But we had this lineup. The lineup was so intense about meeting her that people would come and ask for my autograph, not because they wanted my autograph, but because I was with her.
Wow.
To get my autograph. Never mind her. And her, like she was the star of the day.
Wow.
And, it's all about, you knew Solomia? Yes, I lived with her during the war. What was
Wow.
so, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, if it's that significant for these people, maybe I should, pay attention and write the book.
Yeah.
And I think that was a key moment.
How long did it take you to write the book?
10 years.
10 years.
10 years, yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't write in 1987. I waited. I knew I was going to write, but it took years before I sat down and started writing and doing the research.
Yeah.
So the book only came out last year, actually 1 year ago.
What was that, just due to life, for career, just kind of absorbing everything? Why the delay?
It's sort of, you have a calling,
Mm-hmm.
Before your life is over, you need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are, events in your life that you have to look after before you can go to it. And that's what was happening with me.
Yeah.
I had another book that I was writing about my mother's life.
Mm-hmm.
I published this book. It's called A Promise Kept, about my mother.
Yeah.
And I had some kids growing up and stuff like that I had to sort of look after. But I got to it, and I did it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. How did you get into writing? Is that due to really capturing these special people in your life? What drew you to writing as this calling?
Great questions, Benji. No, as a matter of fact, I didn't think my life was writing. And I'll just show you, there's a plaque above my
I see it.
shoulder there. That's from Toastmasters International.
Yes.
You know about Toastmasters?
I do. I've been a part of Toastmasters off and on throughout the years. So when I lived in Missouri, I believe in Rockford, Illinois, Beaumont, Texas. And I've been a part of Toastmasters as well.
Okay. So I spent 35 years as a member of Toastmasters, and I became a distinguished Toastmaster at the highest level there. Over 35 years. There's some guys who can do it in 6 months. It took me 35 years. But every week, as you know, I went to a club meeting, I watched people present, and then watch people give feedback and how to improve. Don't go stand straight. Don't wobble while you're talking. Look at the audience, things like this. And I thought, this is where I belong. I should be giving presentations. But the world didn't want me there. The world wanted me somewhere else. And it was in the area of writing articles. Now, when I was in university, I share this story quite often. In English 101 at UBC, my professor, he graded my papers all F, F, F. It was terrible. He assigned a project for me to write an essay about a sonnet called Death by John Donne. The sonnet goes, "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty, for thou art not so," and so on. And I wrote an essay on that and got an F. Then he said, well, rewrite it. So I rewrote it, still F, F, F. I wrote that essay 5 times through that year, and other essays and so on. And at the end of the year, the guy just took sympathy on me. Okay, he gave me 50%. So I passed, because he knew if I didn't pass, I wouldn't be able to continue with my studies.
Yeah.
So I was pathetic at writing. But over time, if you write and you study how to write better, not just write. If you want to write, write. If you want to act, act. If you want to, play hockey, play hockey.
Yep.
But that's not the answer. It's act or write or play hockey but learn how to play and write better. The key is you have to study how to be better, not just do it. But I did. And over time, I started getting better. My articles appeared in some student newspapers and stuff like that. And then later, I became a journalist, and I was in New York. I became a UN correspondent, and I wrote, among other papers, for there's a group called Southern News Services back then that had newspapers throughout Canada. And my articles appeared in some of those newspapers. And so I got pretty good. And later, I went to my law practice. I'm practicing law and working with a friend here at Pace Law Firm in Toronto. We used to post little notes to people who had written immigration articles saying, oh, this is great, but you missed this point, or I think you should expand on that point. And over time, Forbes noticed that, I was posting these things on their articles. And there's one of, well, who is this idiot? They looked me up on my website, I guess, and they said, oh, a guy's former UN correspondent. Let's reach out to him. You want to write?
Wow.
Would I? Oh, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's the one and only time. I just want to make this point. That's the one and only time in my life that someone said, reached out to me and said, you want to do something.
Yeah.
All my life, in terms of every job I applied for, anything I wanted in my life, it was always, you're too slow, you're too fast, you're too fat, you're too thin, you're too tall, you're too skinny.
Yeah.
You're too stupid, you're too smart. Never, oh, Andy, come on in. We've been waiting for you. You're the perfect guy for us. Never.
That's a powerful story. I think that shows, I think there's a great life lesson. I got a couple of thoughts. One, I think there's a power of initiative and being proactive, right? With just making those connections and corrections. Two, you mentioned Toastmasters and you became a distinguished speaker. You mentioned, some people do it in 6 months. I know one of those guys who did that, Tristan de Montebello, and he went on to start a company called Ultra Speaking with Michael Gindler. And so I've been doing coaching with Ultra Speaking going back to 2020. So there's a variety of online games that kind of help you simulate that feeling of speaking in front of an audience. Three, I got to know, as you're now writing and publishing these books, did you ever send anything back to that teacher who kept giving you all the F's and say, hey, look what I got here, man. I got some books now. Did you ever do that or follow up or anything?
I think he's probably dead now. Probably roll over in his grave if he made it somehow in this area,
Yeah. Well, let me ask you another question about Solomea.
Sure.
What's been the biggest impact, Andy, that she's had on your life? If you can sum it up, if there's multiple, that's fine. But you spent 10 years writing this book. You know a lot about her life. You're sharing it with the world. You got me fascinated and interested. I got to hear her now. I want to know more about her. What's been the biggest impact on your life?
Well, it's the model that she has presented for me. And I'll share it this way. One day I went to a restaurant, Chinese restaurant, and after dinner I got a Chinese fortune cookie, and it said, do one thing really, really well. And I would describe that as what she did with her life. Now, her life was about opera, but we can talk about any, engineering, law, medicine, teaching, whatever you want, pastoring, whatever it is. I think that formula really works. Do one thing really, really well. And she spent her life perfecting opera in her case. That was her calling. And it started when she had some trouble early in her life. She had a sort of failed marriage that didn't go. She didn't get married, but there was a guy who wanted to marry with her. She called it off. And her father said to her, hey, listen. Okay, you don't want to do that. What do you want with your life? What are you going to do with your life? And she said, I love to sing. I love to sing. And he said, okay, if you're going to sing, you're going to have to go to school and learn how to sing. I'm sending you to school. And that's how it started with her. And she spent her life perfecting that part for her career because she loved it and she was good at it. She had a bit of talent. And I described, some of the strengths that she had already.
Mm-hmm.
And so she made it. So it's the rise from obscurity, a little village in Western Ukraine, Eastern Poland at the time, to world fame with the greatest singers, Caruso, with this guy Puccini being the composer, with Toscanini, the conductor, greatest conductor probably of all time, with those type of people performing on world stages. So what it is for me is it's an example of a life well lived. And when I've got a little granddaughter, her name is Sophia. She lives in New York with my son as her father. This is a book for her, a model for her. It provides healthy, good, solid values of what a woman can achieve. In her case, of woman, right? In our case, men, but we can still relate. Good values, clear good values with hard work and dedication and love.
Yeah.
So that's what I took out of the book.
I love that. Do one thing really, really well. There's an author, Cal Newport, Cal Newport. He's written a number of books like Deep Work, Work So Hard They Can't Ignore You. And that's exactly what she did years before any of these books.
Yeah.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People, like with Stephen and Sean Covey.
Yeah.
But there is something to be said about that, to really focus on a craft.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want shortcuts, and it just takes a lot of hard work, right work, practicing well.
Yeah.
And, it can, she can, you can impact the world like she did. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
I believe, if you focus on something, it has to be narrow enough for, let's say, 5 years, whatever the field and whatever you're interested in, you can become a world expert in that field.
Yeah.
And, rise to the top of whatever it is you want to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, this has been great. We had talked a little bit before too, before we hit the record button. You're an immigration lawyer. Obviously you're from Ukraine. Your family is that correct?
Yes.
So, I do want to ask you, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But, I was just reading up today on the Ukraine-Russian war.
Oh, yeah.
I believe it's over 1,000 days now since the war has been taking place. I'd love to get your thoughts, with how, maybe this is the wrong question, how this is impacting you, or maybe a better question is, what do people need to know about this war? We kind of get relaxed after a while, and this is going on there, and people put flags on social media when it first started, but now there's new stories, there's new things, there's life. So I'd love for you to share what it is that I need to know,
sure.
that we need to know, that you think is important.
Well, thank you for asking that very well put question. So this is what I take from. I'm going to reduce it to the very basic level. Okay. You're in your home. It's your home. You're watching TV. Suddenly a guy breaks through the door, comes in, sits down, says, I live here now. He says, no, wait a minute. This is my home. He says, no, it's my home. No, this is my home. But that's what's happened in Ukraine. Wow. They were an independent, sovereign state. Mm-hmm. And one day the guy broke in the door and came in. Like in his case, he sent in an army. Now, well, that was way on the other side of the world. Why should we worry about that? Well, here are 2 reasons why. First reason, you like your home. You like your peace, your sovereignty, your independence, your freedom. There's an international rules-based order in the world. It's countries live by it. They signed agreements saying, okay, we honor borders. 2 world wars were fought over borders. World War I, 30 million people died. World War II, 50 million people died. At the end of the Second World War, the countries got together and said, okay, let's cut this out. We're going to agree on sovereignty of nations and respect for each other's borders. And they signed a number of agreements respecting borders. And from the end of World War II until now, that international rules-based order has survived, and it has protected all of us, including America and Canada and Ukraine and everywhere, until this event has come along. That's number one. Number two is this. At the end and in the demise of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became the holder of the world's third largest nuclear arsenal of strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. And in 1994, several nations got together to discuss what are we going to do about this, this nuclear arsenal. So the United States, Great Britain, China, France, Ukraine, and Russia met in Budapest, and they had a discussion, and they agreed to this. Ukraine, you surrender your nuclear arsenal to Russia, and we will guarantee your sovereignty and independence. Ukraine held up its part of the bargain. It handed over the weapons to Russia. And today, the nuclear power, Russia, has not honored the agreement and has got troops on the ground in Ukraine. Today, as we talk right now, every day, 100 soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, are dying, and probably about 1,000 Russian soldiers are dying in this war. There have been over 1 million deaths in this war, military deaths, not to mention civilian casualties. Now, there's all kinds of atrocities taking place in Ukraine. There are children, over 100,000 children that have been kidnapped and taken to Russia and are taught to become Russians and to abandon their Ukrainian heritage and, hate Ukrainians. There are people being slaughtered. There are people being, there have been, a genocide has taken place in Ukraine where, entire cities have been leveled. People, entire villages just creamed. People are tortured. Women are raped. Men are castrated. It goes on and on. Okay, every war has, ugliness to it, but this war has been especially ugly, particularly because there's a nuclear element to it. And now there's an argument, if only the Ukrainians would do this and that. Well, the answer is if the Russians would just go back to their country, there would be no war. But they haven't. And their plan is to eradicate Ukraine, like erase it, like totally. So it's hard to come up with an easy solution to that, except to fight. And, so what can we do? Support Ukraine. And Ukraine's people are dying, not our people, Ukraine's people. So we're helping with money and arms and stuff like that. That's, that's our share of it. But they're the ones that are fighting.
Yeah.
People,
thank you.
Last word.
Yeah, please. No, take your time.
People don't die and lay their lives down on the ground, like die for, a few $1,000s, a nice house, like a vacation. They die for principles. And the principles are freedom, liberty, independence, sovereignty. This is my house. Get out.
Yeah.
That's in short what it's all about.
Well said. I appreciate that. You definitely have helped me even more. So I appreciate that. One or two more thoughts. You're an immigration lawyer, so I do want to ask you about this too. What is a misconception about immigration that we need to know about? There's so much in the news. I live here in Texas, so there's a lot of different views. What am I missing, or what are we missing when it comes to this idea of immigration?
Well, let's put it this way. If you, I'll put it in this context, that the criminal justice system in America does not catch every criminal is not an argument for abolishing or changing the criminal justice system. It has to do the best it can.
Mm.
That the border does not block every immigrant who is crossing, every migrant, is not the result is not that we have to shoot people at the border, build a wall that's 50 feet high. It's impossible to solve that problem completely, even if we devoted all our resources in America to blocking anybody from coming across the border. Still they would come. But we can control who comes across the border much better than we have. And we need to. We have to block off the flow, but it's going to be a trickle. I'm sorry. Even if we spent all our money on it and did nothing else, there's still going to be a trickle. Someone crawl under, crawl over, float over, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I think you got to be reasonable. Being unreasonable is to say, well, no, we're not going to, until we've completely scotched that one, we're not going to do anything else. That's like saying, well, until we catch every criminal, we're not going to do anything else. It's impossible. You have to be practical.
Yeah.
And the practical solutions are out there. There are ways to deal with the issue of the border and illegal people in the United States. And I don't want to get into this too far, but as an example, I'd love if it would be possible to deport 11 million people out, everybody who's illegally in the United States. But it's sort of like saying, let's catch all the sinners in the United States and deport them out. Well, hang on. I'm a sinner.
We're all in trouble. Yeah.
Practically speaking, what could we do practically speaking?
Yeah.
Let's figure out something that's reasonable and do it and get these people sorted out. All the criminals out, if they're criminals, if they're shooting, raping, murdering, all those people out. I think every one of us will agree on that. I don't think there's anybody, let's keep all these fentanyl suppliers here. No, nobody wants that. And there's about 1.5 million of those running around in the United States that we got to get rid of.
Gotcha.
Go for it.
Yeah.
As for the others, people like DACA, some kid was born at, 5 months old, comes in with his family and is now going to be deported because he's not born in the United States. Even Trump has said, I'm soft on that. I could see, something happening.
Yeah.
These guys who've been living here for 10 years, more than half of the 11 million illegal immigrants have been living in the United States. I think it's about 2/3 of them have been living in the United States for over 10 years. 10 years is a long time. So what do you do with a guy like that? You're going to kick him out? You're going to pull him out? I get I get the meaning. I get what they're trying to do, which is, punish people who are not going by the rules and help those that are going by the rules. But I think a thing that you have to bear in mind is there are equities involved. A guy comes, he came illegally. He's married to an American. He's got 3 kids. They're all Americans. He's spent 10 years working. He's in the community, at the church. He's at the school. He's, paying taxes and so on. At some stage, you got to say, we got to punish this guy, but you have to, you have to pick the most ferocious punishment. Can you come up with, let's say, a fine, community service, some other, things to deserve the right to stay, not to give them the right to stay, but to earn the right to stay? I think there are things you can do to sort it out that way. That's
Yeah.
where I see.
Yeah. Excellent. No, I appreciate you shedding some light on that. That's obviously it's a big issue, and everybody seems to be thinking about it and is thinking about that. So I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Where can people find your books?
Amazon. Just go on Amazon. You can, type in my name, Andy Semotiuk, Semotiuk, and you'll find any book that, Solomea, or there's The Young Professional is another book I wrote, a career guidebook. But
I like that.
that's
Yeah.
where to go. Or if they have trouble, they can go to myworkvisa.com. You can find my books there as well.
Okay. What's next for Andy?
Well, that's a great question. I'll tell you, I've got that sorted out.
Oh, great. Please share if you're willing.
Okay. I don't know if you noticed, but the older I get, the more life keeps speeding up. And it's like 5 years used to be a long time, a while ago. Now it's not so long. 10 years when I was a small kid was an eternity.
Yeah.
Now 10 years is a measurable amount of time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to write I've got a diary from 1975 until today.
Wow.
So I'm going to get that digitalized, like typed out, because it's in handwritten notes. And I'm going to try and write a book. What did I learn with my life?
Wow. I love that. I got to get a copy of that. Yeah, that's
well,
excellent.
It's going to take about 10 years. So
well, you got to get after it. I'll be waiting for it.
Okay. All right.
Andy, I was thinking about this today. I'm a preacher. I talk about death. Obviously, you're thinking about life and death. It's a normal thing. Some people don't want to do it, but I think there's something to that where, I just had a thought. We can kind of get scared with a lot of things. And I was just thinking, you're going to die one day. Just whatever. Send the email, make the phone call, do whatever. And I think sometimes, we just hold ourselves back of, maybe one day, but no, so like with Solomia, she influenced so many people, and she still continues to influence people into the 21st century, and that took action. And if I remember correctly, you said her dad, fine, we're going to sign you up. You got to learn how to write or sing music, and you got to learn everything about it. And so I think there's just something about that action. And I love that. That's an I can do mindset. That's kind of what this podcast is about. With, I told you I have an implantable cardioverter defibrillator. That's where ICD comes from, right? I can do. And there's biblical thoughts with this as well. I can do all things through him who strengthens me, Philippians 4 and verse 13. So there's something about taking action. And I love that about you with your books and Toastmasters and being a lawyer and Forbes contributor and so much more.
I am a believer, and I pray. I pray to God to help me be a better person.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Let's wrap up with Solomia. One final thought to wrap us up. Let's go back to her. And final thought you want to share about anything with her in your book?
Yeah, I'm going to share something which tags on to what we've just talked about. When I went to see her, she's buried in the view at the cemetery there. And this is back under Soviet times. And when I entered the cemetery, what I saw, instead of crosses and, angels or whatever that you see at most cemeteries, what I saw there were hammer and sickle, red star, memorials, praise of the Communist Party, etc., in the cemeteries. And that was because at that time, it was a dictatorship. It was a totalitarian dictatorship. And they did not tolerate Christianity or faith or anything like that. And when I came to her grave, I saw there were no crosses or anything. She has a mythical Greek statue on her grave. It's I can't remember the name of the mythical person, but it's a guy who played a lyre, and they said that the story behind it was that he sang and played music so beautifully that when he played, the birds stopped flying, the grass stopped growing, and the water in the river stopped flowing. And it made me wonder, well, because she grew up, her father was a Ukrainian Catholic Uniate priest, which is part of the Roman Catholic, it's the Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church. The Pope is the head of the church. But I wondered, like, since she grew up as a child of a priest, whether she had lost her faith and, and whatever. And over time, it was a quandary for me, but I believe that, well, in part, they couldn't put a cross on her grave because it was communist Soviet Union. And there was this like barbarism about it, this like savagery about graves like that, people honoring a hammer and sickle. But today, when they mark the anniversary of her death, they have a religious procession there. They pray at her grave. I prayed at her grave. And I believe spiritually, she never left that world. I believe she believed in God. Now, I'm just, I don't have proof. Not even in the book could I prove it. But I do believe, apple does not fall far from the tree. From where she started to where she ended up, I think it's not that far.
Yeah.
And so that's a thought I leave with.
Yeah. Andy, this has been fantastic. We're going to stop this. Don't hang up on me yet, but to the listeners, thank you so much for listening. And please check out Andy's book and all of his books. Thank you so much, Andy. And we'll talk to you guys later. Take care.